There was a time when being misunderstood felt like a threat to your identity. You felt the need to explain yourself fully, to clarify your intentions, to make sure no one walked away with the wrong version of who you are. You adjusted your words, softened your truth, and sometimes even reshaped your behavior just to avoid being misread. Being understood felt necessary, almost urgent, because it gave you a sense of control over how you were perceived. But something within you has shifted. You no longer feel the same pressure to correct every assumption or defend every interpretation. You are beginning to realize that constantly explaining yourself keeps you emotionally tethered to other people's approval. The need to be understood is slowly leaving you, and in its place is a quiet confidence that does not depend on agreement. You are becoming comfortable being misunderstood because you finally trust your own understanding of yourself. When your image stops being your responsibility, you may have felt quietly responsible for how others saw you, not in an obvious or dramatic way, but in subtle adjustments you made without even thinking. You chose certain words carefully. You explained your decisions in detail. You clarified your tone when you sensed confusion. You made sure your intentions were visible so that no one would misjudge them. It felt necessary to protect how you were perceived, as though your identity depended on it. This became a pattern. You did not only act, you monitored how your actions might be interpreted. You did not simply speak. You anticipated how your words would land. You learned to anticipate misunderstanding before it happened. You tried to stay ahead of assumptions so that no one could define you incorrectly. Even when you were being genuine, part of you was calculating how that genuineness would be received. This constant management of perception carries weight. It divides your attention. Instead of being fully present in your life, a portion of your awareness is always observing how you are being viewed. You start living partly through other people's interpretations. When someone misunderstands you, it feels like something has slipped out of your control. When someone forms an incomplete opinion, you feel compelled to correct it. Something shifts. You begin to recognize that perception is not fully yours to control. Every person filters you through their own experiences, beliefs, and expectations. Two people can witness the same action and walk away with completely different conclusions. No amount of explanation guarantees alignment. No amount of clarification ensures that your image remains intact in every mind. This realization can feel unsettling at first. If you are not managing how you are seen, what happens next? Will people assume the worst? Will they misinterpret your silence? Will they misunderstand your boundaries? The instinct to protect your image may try to reassert itself, but clarity replaces anxiety. You begin to see that your responsibility lies in your conduct, not in someone else's conclusions. You can choose honesty, fairness, and integrity. You can choose how you behave. You cannot choose how someone else processes what they see. When this understanding settles in, you stop chasing perfect perception. You no longer feel obligated to over-explain every choice. You no longer feel the need to correct every assumption. You allow people to hold their version of you without feeling threatened by it. You realize that misunderstanding does not erase your truth. This does not mean you become careless. You still value communication. You still aim to be clear. The difference is that you no longer exhaust yourself trying to control every narrative. You understand that some interpretations will always exist beyond your influence. Letting go of image management changes how you move through the world. Your interactions become less calculated. Your words feel lighter because they are not burdened with the need to persuade. Your silence becomes steady rather than defensive. You trust that those who are meant to understand you will do so without endless justification. You also recognize that constantly shaping your image once kept you fragmented. A part of you was always adjusting for impact, trimming edges, polishing tone, smoothing contradictions. When you release that responsibility, you experience a new kind of wholeness. You act from alignment rather than anticipation. There is quiet strength in accepting that you cannot be fully understood by everyone. It frees you from performing clarity. It frees you from chasing agreement. It frees you from the exhausting task of being universally acceptable. When your image stops being your responsibility, you stop living for interpretation. You begin living from conviction. You shift your focus inward, toward consistency between your values and your actions. Your peace no longer depends on how accurately someone perceives you. You understand that your role is to live truthfully, not to be perfectly interpreted. That distinction changes your posture. It makes you steadier. It makes you less reactive. It allows you to move forward without constantly looking back to check how you appear. And in that shift, you reclaim something essential: yourself. The end of emotional over-explaining. You may have felt the need to explain not only your actions, but your emotions. If you pulled back, you clarified why. If you set a boundary, you justified it. If you changed your mind, you offered detailed reasons. It wasn't enough to simply feel something. You believed you had to make it acceptable to others. You translated your inner world into carefully arranged sentences so no one would misinterpret your intentions. Emotional over-explaining often begins as self-protection. You learn that if people understand your reasoning, they are less likely to judge you. If they see the full picture, they might not assume the worst. So you narrate your feelings in detail. You soften your boundaries with long explanations. You apologize for reactions that were simply human. You provide context for decisions that require no permission. This becomes a reflex. Instead of stating, "This doesn't work for me," you add layers of justification. Instead of saying, "I need space," you attach a long explanation to avoid seeming distant. Instead of holding silence, you rush to clarify what your silence means. You become fluent in emotional translation, making sure your inner state is fully understood. But something begins to change. You start noticing how draining this constant clarification feels. Every conversation becomes a small defense case. Every boundary requires a speech. Every emotional shift demands a presentation. You feel as though you are constantly defending your humanity, as if your feelings must pass an invisible approval process before they are allowed to exist. You realize that not every emotion requires an explanation. Not every decision needs to be defended. Not every feeling needs to be justified to remain valid. This realization does not make you distant. It makes you grounded. You begin responding more simply. When something feels wrong, you say it without over-elaborating. When you need distance, you take it without constructing a detailed narrative. When you change direction, you allow that change without seeking consensus. You notice that those who truly respect you do not require endless clarification. They accept your words at face value. They trust that your boundaries are thoughtful. They do not demand a full emotional breakdown to validate your experience. This shift reduces the pressure you once carried. You stop rehearsing explanations in your mind. You stop anticipating objections before they are voiced. You stop feeling responsible for managing other people's emotional reactions to your honesty. Emotional over-explaining often hides a deeper fear, the fear of being misunderstood or rejected. When you begin releasing the need to explain everything, you confront that fear directly. You accept that some people may not fully understand you. You accept that some may misinterpret your tone or intentions, and you accept that this does not require correction every time. Simplicity replaces over-analysis. Instead of stretching yourself thin trying to be perfectly clear, you trust that your feelings are legitimate, even if they are not perfectly articulated. You recognize that authenticity does not require exhaustive detail. It requires alignment. This does not mean you stop communicating. It means you communicate without overcompensating. You speak honestly without adding layers to make yourself easier to digest. You allow your words to stand without excessive explanation. The end of emotional over-explaining also changes how you experience yourself. You feel less fragmented. You are no longer splitting your energy between feeling and defending the feeling. You are present with what you feel instead of translating it immediately. You realize that you do not owe everyone access to your inner process. Some emotions are private, some decisions are personal, some shifts do not require public reasoning. Letting go of over-explaining strengthens your sense of self. You become more concise, not colder. You become clearer, not harsher. You trust that those who are meant to understand you will do so without a detailed script. As this pattern fades, you reclaim emotional energy. Conversations feel lighter. Boundaries feel cleaner. Silence feels less threatening. You no longer feel the need to justify your existence or your experience. You accept that your feelings can exist without defense. And that acceptance marks growth. The end of emotional over-explaining is not withdrawal, it is maturity. It is the quiet confidence that your internal world does not need constant validation to remain real. Releasing the habit of clearing your name. You may have felt an invisible urgency whenever your character was questioned, even slightly. If someone misunderstood your motives, you felt compelled to correct it immediately. If your actions were interpreted in a way that did not reflect your intentions, you rushed to defend yourself. You wanted the record set straight. You wanted clarity restored. You wanted your name cleared. This habit did not come from ego alone. It came from a deep desire to be seen accurately. You did not want to be reduced to a misunderstanding. You did not want your silence to be labeled as indifference, or your boundaries to be mistaken for cruelty. So you stepped forward with explanations. You defended your choices. You corrected assumptions. You believed that if you did not speak up, the wrong story would define you. This pattern became automatic. The moment you sensed misinterpretation, you felt tension rise. You rehearsed responses in your mind. You drafted clarifications in conversations. You wanted to restore balance as quickly as possible. You thought that if you could just explain yourself thoroughly enough, everything would feel right again. But something begins to shift when you notice how exhausting this is. You realize that no matter how clearly you defend yourself, not everyone will revise their opinion. Some people will cling to their narrative. Some will prefer their version of events. Some will interpret your explanation as further proof of what they already believe. You begin to see that clearing your name is not always within your control. This awareness can feel uncomfortable. Letting a misunderstanding exist without correction can feel like surrender. It can feel as if you are allowing a false image to stand. But gradually, you understand something deeper. Your integrity does not depend on universal agreement. Your truth does not weaken because someone misreads it. Your character does not collapse because someone doubts it. Releasing the habit of clearing your name does not mean you accept false accusations or tolerate disrespect. It means you discern when defense is necessary and when it is driven by insecurity. You begin choosing your responses more carefully. You speak when clarity serves growth, not when it merely serves pride. You notice that constantly defending yourself keeps you anchored to other people's perceptions. You stay mentally attached to their interpretation, replaying conversations and imagining alternative explanations. Your energy becomes tied to their understanding. When you release the need to clear your name, you untie that attachment. This release creates space. You no longer rush to justify every decision. You allow some misunderstandings to dissolve on their own. You trust that those who genuinely seek truth will approach you directly. You accept that some people are not interested in clarity, They are interested in maintaining their viewpoint. Letting go of this habit strengthens your inner stability. You begin relying less on external validation and more on internal alignment. When you know your intentions are clean, you do not feel the same urgency to defend them. When you know your actions were thoughtful, you do not feel threatened by criticism. You also recognize that trying to clear your name often comes from fear. Fear of being judged unfairly, fear of losing respect, fear of being excluded. As you grow, that fear loses its grip. You become less concerned with being perfectly represented in every story. You become more focused on living in a way that feels consistent with your values. This shift does not make you passive, it makes you selective. You choose which battles matter. You choose when explanation brings resolution and when silence preserves dignity. You learn that not every accusation deserves your energy. Not every rumor requires your attention. Not every misinterpretation requires correction. Releasing the habit of clearing your name allows you to move forward without constantly looking back. You stop chasing the need to repair every perception. You stop feeling responsible for how your absence is interpreted. You accept that people will form conclusions based on limited information and that this is part of human interaction. There is freedom in this acceptance. You begin acting from conviction rather than from reputation management. You stop trying to control narratives that were never fully yours. You trust that over time, your consistent behavior speaks louder than immediate defense. When you no longer feel compelled to clear your name, you reclaim energy that was once spent on justification. You gain peace that does not depend on public approval. You discover that your worth does not fluctuate with opinion. You realize that living truthfully is more important than being perfectly understood, and that realization marks a turning point. You no longer chase corrections. You live in alignment, living without correcting every assumption. You begin to notice how much of your energy has been spent managing other people's interpretations. Someone assumes you are distant, and you rush to explain that you are simply focused. Someone assumes you are upset, and you quickly clarify that you are just tired. Someone assumes you do not care, and you provide proof that you do. You feel an almost automatic pull to step in and reshape the narrative before it settles. Correcting assumptions can feel responsible, it can feel mature, it can even feel necessary. You tell yourself that clarity prevents conflict, that explanation maintains connection, that defending your perspective protects your relationships. And sometimes that is true. Communication matters. Honest dialogue matters. You may realize that you have taken on a role that was never entirely yours. You have been trying to control how others construct their perception of you. The truth is, assumptions are inevitable. People interpret through their own filters. They see you through the lens of their experiences, their fears, their expectations. Even when you speak clearly, their understanding is shaped by what they already believe. You cannot fully enter someone else's mind and rearrange their conclusions. Living without correcting every assumption does not mean you allow lies to define you. It means you stop reacting to every incomplete interpretation. It means you begin discerning when explanation is productive and when it is simply a reflex born from discomfort. There is a difference between meaningful conversation and compulsive clarification. Meaningful conversation happens when both people are open. Compulsive clarification happens when you feel uneasy about being seen inaccurately. You may not even realize how often you step into that second category. You sense misunderstanding, and before it fully forms, you rush to dissolve it. But what if not every misunderstanding requires intervention? What if some assumptions can exist without damaging your truth? When you stop correcting every assumption, you experience a strange kind of freedom. You allow others to hold their version of you without constantly reshaping it. You accept that you cannot micromanage perception. You trust that those who truly want to understand you will seek clarity directly rather than relying on silent interpretation. This shift can feel uncomfortable at first. There is a vulnerability in allowing someone to misunderstand you. There is a temptation to step in and correct. Your mind may tell you that silence equals agreement, that if you do not clarify, you are confirming their view. But silence does not always mean surrender. Sometimes it means strength. It means you are secure enough in your own reality that you do not need to contest every opinion. It means you are no longer threatened by incomplete perspectives. It means you recognize that your identity is not fragile. Living without correcting every assumption also changes your internal landscape. You stop replaying conversations endlessly. You stop crafting imaginary explanations for people who may never ask. You stop feeling responsible for how every situation is interpreted. You begin asking yourself a different question. Does this misunderstanding truly require my energy? Often, the answer is no. Not every misinterpretation affects your life. Not every opinion influences your direction. Not every assumption deserves your response. Some are temporary, some dissolve naturally. Some were never rooted in genuine curiosity to begin with. As you release the need to correct everything, your interactions become lighter. You speak when necessary, not compulsively. You explain when it brings clarity, not when it brings temporary comfort. You allow ambiguity to exist without feeling obligated to resolve it. You also begin noticing something important. When you stop correcting every assumption, the people who genuinely care step closer. They ask questions instead of assuming. They seek understanding instead of creating conclusions. The quality of your relationships shifts because you are no longer managing them through over-clarification. There is maturity in allowing others to think what they think while remaining steady within yourself. It does not mean you agree with their interpretation. It means you are not defined by it. Your focus returns to what truly matters: your actions, your intentions, your consistency. Over time, these speak louder than any single assumption. You realize that your life does not need constant defense. It needs alignment. Living without correcting every assumption does not make you indifferent. It makes you centered. You trust that your truth does not collapse under misunderstanding. You understand that perception is fluid and that trying to control it completely is exhausting. And in that understanding, you find something rare: peace that does not depend on being perfectly interpreted. Allowing distance without panic. Distance may have felt like danger. When someone pulled away, responded less, or became quieter, something inside you tightened. You felt the need to close the gap immediately. You reached out, clarified, adjusted, softened, or explained. You tried to restore closeness as quickly as possible because separation felt threatening. Distance used to trigger urgency. You interpreted silence as rejection. You interpreted space as disapproval. You interpreted slower communication as loss of connection. And because of that interpretation, you rushed to fix what might not have been broken. This reaction did not come from weakness. It came from conditioning. At some point, distance may have meant instability. It may have signaled withdrawal, abandonment, or emotional risk. So you learned to react quickly. You learned to repair fast. You learned to maintain closeness even when it cost you peace. But as you grow, something changes. You begin to realize that distance is not always a threat. Sometimes it is neutral. Sometimes it is necessary. Sometimes it has nothing to do with you at all. People move inward. They process privately. They shift focus. They become busy. Not every space between you and someone else is a sign of collapse. When this understanding begins to settle, panic weakens. You no longer feel the immediate need to close every gap. You allow space to exist without chasing reassurance. You stop overanalyzing response times. You stop assuming silence equals judgment. You begin trusting that connection does not disappear simply because it becomes quieter. Allowing distance without panic requires internal stability. It means your sense of security is not entirely dependent on constant proximity. It means you are not measuring your worth through immediate validation. It means you are strong enough to let relationships breathe. This shift does not mean you become detached or careless. You still value connection. You still care deeply. The difference is that you are no longer driven by fear when closeness changes shape. You recognize that healthy space can strengthen bonds rather than weaken them. You understand that constant intensity is not the only form of intimacy. You begin to appreciate rhythm moments of closeness, followed by moments of individuality. You also start noticing how much anxiety you once carried around maintaining emotional proximity. You felt responsible for keeping everything stable. You felt accountable for preventing drift. You believed that if you relaxed, things might fall apart. Now you see that holding on too tightly can create pressure. It can restrict natural movement. It can turn connection into obligation. When you release the need to control distance, you create room for authenticity. You allow others to step back without assuming the worst. You allow yourself to step back without guilt. You understand that closeness does not require constant contact. Trust replaces urgency. This change transforms your internal world. When someone takes space, you no longer spiral into self-doubt. You do not immediately question your value. You do not rush to analyze every recent interaction. You remain steady. That steadiness comes from a deeper belief. You are whole on your own. Connection enhances your life, but it does not define your existence. When you understand this, distance loses its power to destabilize you. It becomes simply a variation in interaction, not a threat to your identity. Allowing distance without panic also teaches you patience. You give people time to process. You give yourself time to breathe. You stop trying to accelerate emotional resolution. You accept that some conversations will unfold slowly. This acceptance builds maturity. You are no longer reacting from fear of loss. You are responding from confidence in your foundation. You know that what is real does not vanish because it becomes quieter. You know that what is aligned will return without force. As you practice this calmness, your relationships change. They feel less pressured. They feel less dramatic. They feel more grounded. You interact because you want to, not because you are afraid of losing access. Allowing distance without panic marks a profound transformation. It signals that you are no longer seeking constant reassurance. It shows that your security comes from within, not from continuous external confirmation. You stop chasing closeness to avoid discomfort. You start trusting connection to sustain itself. And in that trust, you find a deeper form of peace, letting interpretation belong to others. For much of your life, you may have felt responsible not only for your actions, but for how those actions were understood. You carefully chose your words, adjusted your tone, and shaped your behavior to reduce the chance of being misinterpreted. If someone misunderstood you, it felt personal. It felt like something needed to be corrected immediately. You believed clarity was your duty. You began to realize that interpretation does not live entirely in your hands. The meaning people attach to your behavior is influenced by their experiences, expectations, emotional state, and personal history. Two people can hear the same sentence and walk away with completely different conclusions. You can speak honestly and still be misunderstood. You can act with integrity and still be questioned. This understanding marks a turning point. You begin to see that once your words leave your mouth, they enter someone else's perspective. They are filtered through memories you do not share and assumptions you did not create. You can be thoughtful and still be misread. You can be quiet and still be labeled. You can be direct and still be misjudged. Letting interpretation belong to others means accepting that you cannot control how your presence is processed. You can control your intention, you can control your behavior, you can control your integrity, but you cannot control the meaning someone else assigns to it. This can feel uncomfortable. You may feel exposed. You may worry that silence will confirm misunderstandings. You may feel tempted to step in and reshape how you are seen. The instinct to explain can be strong. It feels safer to try to guide perception than to let it unfold on its own. Something steadier develops. You begin trusting that your character speaks louder over time than any single moment of interpretation. You stop trying to manage every narrative. You stop chasing perfect representation. You allow people to hold their version of you without feeling threatened by it. This shift does not mean you stop communicating clearly. It means you communicate once, honestly, and allow the rest to unfold. You are no longer constantly adjusting to fit someone else's lens. You are no longer exhausting yourself trying to prevent every possible misunderstanding. Letting interpretation belong to others frees you from mental overwork. You stop replaying conversations to analyze how you were perceived. You stop constructing imaginary explanations for people who never asked. You release the need to correct silent judgments. You also begin noticing that interpretation says more about the observer than about you. Someone who expects hostility may find it in neutrality. Someone who expects rejection may sense it in independence. Someone who expects weakness may misread softness. Their interpretation reflects their internal framework. Understanding this softens your reaction. Instead of feeling attacked by every misreading, you feel curious. You recognize that perception is shaped by layers you cannot see. You no longer internalize every assumption as truth. You allow others to interpret you based on where they are, without feeling responsible for reshaping their viewpoint. This acceptance brings stability. You are no longer walking on emotional eggshells. You are no longer hyper-aware of how every word might be processed. You are grounded in your intention rather than in others' conclusions. There is strength in this posture. It signals that your identity is not fragile. You are not dependent on universal agreement to feel secure. You do not require constant reassurance that you are being seen correctly. You begin acting from alignment instead of anticipation. You say what you mean without over-calculating impact. You hold silence without feeling pressured to clarify it. You make decisions without drafting explanations in advance. Letting interpretation belong to others is not indifference. It is maturity. It is understanding that clarity does not guarantee alignment. It is recognizing that your responsibility ends with authenticity. You also find relief in this shift. Your mind becomes quieter. You are not constantly tracking how you might be misunderstood. You are not preparing rebuttals for judgments that may never be voiced. You conserve energy. This posture reshapes your relationships. Those who genuinely want to understand you approach with openness. Those who prefer assumptions continue to hold them. You no longer chase either group. You trust consistency over persuasion. You trust time over immediate correction. You trust your integrity over someone else's narrative. Letting interpretation belong to others means accepting that you cannot inhabit every perspective. You cannot live inside every mind. You cannot guarantee universal clarity. What you can do is live truthfully. And when you live truthfully, you no longer need to control how your story is told in rooms you are not in. The strength of being misread and remaining whole. There was a time when being misunderstood felt like something breaking. If someone misread your tone, your intention, or your silence, it unsettled you deeply. You felt a pressure to fix it immediately, as if your identity depended on being seen accurately. Misinterpretation felt like a distortion of who you were, and you rushed to correct it before it could settle. But growth changes your relationship with misunderstanding. You begin to realize that being misread does not erase your truth. It does not shrink your character. It does not alter your integrity. It simply reveals that perception is never fully within your control. People will always interpret through their own experiences, their own expectations, and their own emotional filters. The strength you develop is not in preventing misinterpretation. It remains steady when it happens. Remaining whole while being misread requires a deep internal foundation. It means you no longer measure your worth by someone else's understanding. It means your sense of self does not collapse when someone forms an incomplete picture of you. You are not fragile in the face of assumption. This does not mean you enjoy being misunderstood. It means you are no longer destabilized by it. You begin to see that clarity is valuable, but it is not the source of your stability. You can speak honestly and still be misinterpreted. You can act with integrity and still be questioned. You can remain silent and still be judged. None of these outcomes define you unless you allow them to. The real transformation occurs when you stop fighting every incorrect narrative. You stop feeling the urge to correct every distortion. You allow misunderstanding to exist without letting it fracture your peace. This posture is powerful because it reflects self-trust. You trust your intentions. You trust your decisions. You trust your alignment. When you trust yourself, you do not need universal confirmation. You do not require everyone to see you perfectly to feel secure. You accept that some people will always view you through their own lens. Remaining whole while being misread also changes how you engage with conflict. You respond calmly instead of defensively. You clarify when necessary, but you do not argue endlessly. You understand that sometimes explanation brings resolution, and sometimes it only fuels debate. You choose peace over persuasion. There is also humility in this strength. You recognize that you have misread others in your own life. You have formed assumptions. You have interpreted behavior based on limited information. Understanding this makes you less reactive when it happens to you. Instead of collapsing inward or lashing outward, you remain centered. You allow the moment to pass without attaching your identity to it. You understand that your character is built through consistent action, not through perfect perception. This steadiness frees you from emotional turbulence. You stop replaying conversations to defend yourself in your mind. You stop constructing imaginary explanations. You stop seeking reassurance that you were understood correctly. You rest in your own clarity. Remaining whole while being misread also strengthens your boundaries. You no longer overextend yourself to prove your goodness. You no longer reshape yourself to avoid being misjudged. You allow people to see you partially without feeling compelled to fill in every gap. You discover that true strength is quiet. It does not demand validation. It does not chase agreement. It does not panic when misunderstood. It stands firm in its own foundation. Being misread becomes less threatening because you know who you are. You are not defined by perception. You are defined by alignment between your values and your actions. You understand that some misunderstandings will correct themselves over time. Some will not. Either way, your wholeness remains intact. This is maturity. You no longer depend on perfect representation to feel complete. You allow imperfection in how you are seen without internal fragmentation. You move forward without carrying the weight of every incorrect assumption. The strength of being misread and remaining whole is not loud. It is steady. It is the confidence that your identity does not shift with opinion. You do not shrink. You do not overcompensate. You do not unravel. You remain intact. And in that steadiness, you discover a deeper kind of freedom, the freedom of being yourself without needing to be fully understood. There comes a point in your growth where you no longer measure your peace by how accurately you are perceived. You stop fighting every misunderstanding. You stop defending every silence. You stop reshaping yourself to fit someone else's interpretation. Not because you have become indifferent, but because you have become grounded. The need to be understood once felt urgent because your identity felt exposed without confirmation. Now your identity stands on its own. You no longer collapse under assumption. You no longer chase clarification for emotional safety. You allow people to hold their version of you while you remain anchored in your truth. This is not withdrawal, it is maturity. You are no longer performing clarity, you are living alignment. You are no longer negotiating your worth through explanation. You are moving forward without dragging every narrative behind you. The need to be understood is leaving you because you finally understand yourself. And that is enough.